The way I define a change maker is simply someone who leads positive change from wherever they are. I believe that a Nobel Prize winner can be a change maker, but also a new recent graduate of university who's entering a product management job can also be a change maker. Changing how we sort of see and interact with the world. And my goal in my teaching is to help them find their own voice, that there's not any one way to lead change, but that each of us can lead from where we are. Yeah, fundamentally, each and every one of us can be change makers and leaders.
Hello, this is Yoon-Gyu, and I've got a great guest here with me today. I can't wait to tell you about him. He's doing some amazing things, and we are going to get you all excited about it. Hello, Alex. Please introduce yourself.
Gladly. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you. Nice to meet you. And thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. I have a great love of Seoul. I've spent some time. I spent about a week there, fell in love with the city. And so it's just wonderful to be with you today. So I'm coming to you from the San Francisco Bay Area. I was born and raised here, and I wear a number of different hats. I'm a social entrepreneur. I'm a professor. I'm an author. And maybe my favorite is I'm a dad. So now at UC Berkeley, I teach in the Haas School of Business and the School of Public Health. And then, as you mentioned, just recently, I had a book come out called Becoming a Change Maker in English and Change Maker in Korean. And thrilled to be here with you to talk a little bit more about some of the lessons and how your viewers, how your community can be change makers too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before your book came out, a lecture with the same name was offered. I heard that the Becoming a Change Maker class held at UC Berkeley is very popular. And although it is in the book, I think subscribers who are watching this interview will also be curious about it. If there is a story behind the creation of the course, please tell us.
Oh, gladly. Yeah. So I guess I should first say that I'm not a typical UC Berkeley professor. I don't have a PhD. Before teaching this class, had never even taken a class in business. I had studied political science and economics, but never business. But so much of life is having that one opportunity and taking a chance. And so I found myself meeting with the assistant dean of curriculum at Berkeley Haas. He's the person that oversees all the faculty and chooses all the classes. And it was a very special moment to meet with him. And I figured, well, who knows if I'll get this shot again? So let me try it. And I gave a pitch saying, what about if we create a class called Becoming a Change Maker? It's the class I wish I could have taken when I was back as a student at university. And I told him a little bit about the class, about how it was built on some of my own experiences. And I very much expected him to say no. But to my surprise, he said yes. He said, yeah, okay, put together a syllabus, show it to me, and we'll go from there. So there I was. I had created this brand new class, very different from a traditional business curriculum. It's not a finance class or an accounting class. It's a leadership, innovation, entrepreneurship class. And so,
why do you think students want to participate in Becoming a Change Maker class? Have there been any memorable moments while teaching classes?
I think that my students, like so many people around the world, perhaps the readers of the book, the viewers of your channel, we want to make a difference. We want to feel like our life has some impact on the world. But there's also so many forces that tell us not to, that tell us to just sort of stay where we are, to play small, to just follow the rules. And I think we're hungry. My students are hungry. I think so many people are hungry to do more. But sometimes you need someone to give you that permission, to give you the resources and the tools and the motivation and the encouragement to say, yes, it's okay to go your own way, to do things differently, to live a life that's not just about profit, but also about impact. And I think we yearn for that. We want that so deeply, but we don't always have enough messages in our world that tell us that that's okay. And so I teach in a very inclusive way. I teach in a way that tries to meet each student where they are, with their own unique needs. And my goal in my teaching is to help them find their own voice, that there's not any one way to lead change, but that each of us can lead from where we are. And the way that I teach, and you mentioned about memorable moments, so I guess I can speak to one. One of my favorite concepts to teach in class is about failure. And I think failing. And I think that many of us, intellectually in our heads, we can say it's important to fail and to learn from failure. We might know something called the failure paradox. That's the idea that we look at the most successful people and we think, wow, they've succeeded a lot. But the truth is, the most successful people also fail a lot. It's not that they have a great ratio of successes to failures. Rather, it's they fail and they fail and they fail, and then they keep going until they get that success. So it's one thing to understand that in our heads. It's a different thing to understand that in our bodies. So after a class where we talk about some research and some data and a case study, I then put up 2 words on a slide, and it just says, go fail.
Go fail.
And my students kind of look at each other going, well, what's going on? And I say, yeah, I'm serious. You have 10 minutes. You have to go leave the classroom and you have to go get rejected. You have to ask someone for something and you cannot come back until someone has said no to you. My students, perhaps like many of your viewers, are high achievers. They succeed a lot and they're used to doing things the right way. So this idea of failing is terrifying. It's so scary to them. But because it's part of a class, they go out and they do it. They leave, and I can see that their faces are red with fear, their hearts are beating, and they walk out nervously and quietly. But when they come back in the classroom, the energy is so loud and excitement is everywhere. And they come back as new people. We find that 2 things happen. For about 30% of people, they go out, they're sure they'll get rejected, but they actually get a yes. I think about one woman who went to a cafe downstairs and she said, hi, could I have a free orange juice? And the guy there says, yeah, okay. She goes, uh-oh, I'm supposed to fail. Okay, can I have 2 orange juices? And he says, yeah, okay. Then she asked for 3, and thankfully he says, no, you can't have 3. But she came back to class with 2 orange juices. And to me, this is a beautiful example that sometimes our first failure is that we're just too scared to ask for something in the first place.
I see.
Then for about 70% of students, they go out, they fail, they get rejected, and they come back. But rather than feeling bad about themselves, they actually feel more self-confidence. They feel encouraged. They realize that they asked for something, they got rejected, but no one laughed at them, no one made fun of them, they continued on. And if they could ask for something like that, that's kind of silly. Imagine what they could do when they ask for something they really want. So now you asked for sort of a memorable moment. I think about one of my students, and she was so shy and so scared of failing. I gave her 10 minutes, and she spent about 7 minutes just one-on-one with me in the class, just telling me how scared she was, she didn't want to fail, and asking me for advice. And so finally, I helped her get the one question to ask. I said, okay, go ask someone else in the hallway. Ask them if you can put on their shoes. Because what stranger would let you wear someone's shoes? I said, I know they'll say no. So she finally took a deep breath, went out and she asked. And of course, the woman said, no, you can't wear my shoes. But she came back from class. And then it turned out a couple of months later, she ran for student body government to run and be one of the leaders at UC Berkeley, and she won. And it's hard to imagine that she ever would have had the courage to run for something she really believed in if she didn't first find that confidence that came from asking a woman if she could wear her shoes and getting rejected.
One of the purposes of your class is getting used to the failures. How did you think of that concept?
Think about my own experience. And
your own experience.
So many of the things that I've done have come on the other side of failure and rejection. From my time as an entrepreneur, where I think I got about 80 no's before I got my first venture capital check. Or I think about the process of writing a book where I got 24 no's before I got 1 yes as a publisher. So much of what I've been able to do is merely just being okay with failure. But it's not easy. It's like a muscle that we learn.
Right.
And so I want to help my students also feel that way, because that's something we don't often learn in school. We often learn just to succeed. But I think to succeed in the real world, we have to be okay with failure.
It's just a few chances to succeed in the real world, right? And
Right.
Also you talked about the own voice. And could you tell me more specific about it, the own voice of the students?
Yeah, we so often in business schools talk about leadership as there's only one way to lead. Maybe you have to be the loud, authoritative leader, or you have to be the quiet person who tells everyone else what to do and doesn't do anything themselves. But humans are unique. Students are unique. And I think that leadership is this really wonderful way to put yourself into the world. I like to say that who you are is how you lead. So the person you are influences the type of leader you are. And so I want to give my students a wide range of perspectives, a wide range of being themselves as leaders. And then I also believe that each of us can lead. And so instead of waiting for someone else to say, okay, you can be a leader, instead it's finding our own voice, our own unique voice, and saying, I can bring that to the world.
I see. Okay, now shall we move on to the book story? The Korean versions you've got, the title is Changemaker, but Changemaker is a somewhat unfamiliar concept because it is not a word commonly used in Korea. Literally translated, it means a person who creates change. How can we understand and imagine being a change maker?
Yeah, thanks. It's so exciting to think that this word change maker is now going out into Korea. So the way I define a change maker is simply someone who leads positive change from wherever they are. And so you'll see in that definition that there's no mention of roles or of titles. I believe that a Nobel Prize winner can be a change maker, but also a new recent graduate of university who's entering a product management job can also be a change maker. Oh. That it's this way of seeing the world around us and our role in shaping it. We can almost add change maker to our different identities. We could be a change maker lawyer, a change maker scientist, a change maker politician, but also a change maker dad, a change maker friend, a change maker parent, and so on. It's changing how we sort of see and interact with the world. I like to ask my students, who comes to mind for you when you hear the word change maker? And I'd be so curious to hear from your listeners, from your viewers, who comes to mind for you? Maybe people could leave that as a comment for who a change maker is to them. But when I ask my students, it's a wide variety of people. It's people like Martin Luther King and Gandhi. It's also people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. But sometimes it's also someone's boss or someone's parent. So there's a wide range of people who I think can be change makers. But a way that I think your viewers can start thinking about this idea comes from the poet. She's an American poet named Amanda Gorman. And she has a wonderful poem. It's called The Hill We Climb. And in this poem, she ends it with 3 final lines. And so I'll share those 3 lines with you, which I think embody what it means to be a change maker. She says, "For there is always light if we are brave enough to see it, if we're brave enough to be it." This idea, for there's always light. Change makers believe that things may be hard or tough or dark now, but there's always another way. Things can always be better. There's always another possibility, for there's always light. If we're brave enough to see it. Sometimes we think that vision is something that only a CEO can have. But I think actually each of us can have a vision, whether that's a vision for our own life, a vision for our company, our team, our organization. And it's about seeing things that others may not see quite yet, a change that needs to be made, an injustice that needs to be addressed. And in that third part, if we're only brave enough to be it. Being a change maker takes courage. You have to be okay with putting yourself out there. That's why we spend so much time talking about failure, because it does require being brave, having courage, and saying, look, I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I do know that I care about this change, and I'm going to give it a try. We'll see what happens, but I will at least give it a shot.
Okay, so everyone could be a change maker. Okay, I'm not sure whether you've seen this or not, but one of the Amazon book reviews said, I was skeptical about whether this book would be helpful to me in retirement. Since I've been retired for over 10 years, why do I need to be a change maker? But when I opened it, I found the book of my life. Can anyone become a change maker? What if someone or not a leader somewhere?
Wow, I really love that review. I hadn't seen that, but that's very meaningful. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, fundamentally, each and every one of us can be change makers and leaders. When I teach at UC Berkeley, I like to, the very first day of class, the very first question that I ask students is, if the word leader didn't exist, what word would you use instead? What would you use instead?
Right. Chairman?
Chairman, sure. So it's so interesting to see what people say. Sometimes people say guide or mentor or chairman
Right.
or facilitator. But for me, the word is change maker. Because what I like about a change maker that's perhaps different from a leader is that it doesn't require a title and it doesn't require authority. We often think of leader as being, maybe there's only one leader in a company, but I think each of us can be change makers.
Each of us.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the person's thoughts around, like, does it matter to me as I'm in retirement, or can anyone be a change maker? Why should I even worry about it? I think that no matter how you feel about change, the world will never change as slowly as it is right now. It feels like the world is moving faster and faster and faster, and it is. And so I think we have two choices. These are choices as people in the working world, sure, but also just questions as humans, which is, with this pace of change, do we decide to just bury our heads in the sand? That's an American saying, but sort of, do we just like duck down and just hope to survive the change? Or do we learn to get so comfortable with change that we can navigate, shape, and steer it to make positive change for ourselves and those around us? Now, we could have a debate and say, is change happening? Is it not change? Whatever. But the truth is, it's happening. We can't stop change, but rather we can change the way we show up and interact with change. And that's what being a change maker means.
I see. And you created a formula for the influence of a change maker using 3 elements: leadership, values, and behavior. What do they mean?
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah. I teach at UC Berkeley, which has won so many Nobel Prizes in mathematics. I will never, ever, ever win a Nobel Prize in mathematics. I barely graduated math. So I only teach one math equation in my whole class, only one class. And it's a simple equation. So as you said, it's put in parentheses, it's your mindset and your leadership. I'll define each, multiplied by your action. So the mindset is sort of my inward traits, kind of how I show up in the world. My leadership is my ability to bring others along the journey with me, my outward focus. And then you multiply that by taking action. So what does this equation tell us? It doesn't take a Nobel Prize winning mathematician to know that when you multiply a number by 0, the result is 0. 5 times 0 is 0. But even a big number, even 1 million multiplied by 0 is still 0. So this tells us that if you want to have an impact as a change maker, it's not enough to just read books, to just take classes, to work on yourself. You have to take action. If we never take any action, we can never have any impact as a change maker.
Could you recommend some specific actions to become a change maker?
So I think it's so important to recognize that first, change is hard. I work with everywhere from 18-year-olds at university, and then I also do consulting and advising for big multinational companies and Silicon Valley giants. And so as I do this, you would think that change gets easier and easier. It doesn't. Change is hard, and change is really scary. And so I think it's really important that don't blame yourself if taking action feels hard. That's okay. It's hard. But like anything, we can sort of build the muscles to get more comfortable. And so one small thing that I like teaching my students, I call micro change. The idea here is that before you do a big change, purposefully get comfortable with smaller changes. So I give assignments like, for an entire week, eat only dinner foods for breakfast and breakfast foods for dinner. Or for an entire week, take a different path to work each day. If you normally drive, walk. If you normally take the subway, drive. Get in a different way. Maybe you let someone else choose your music playlist that you listen to for an entire week. They get to choose whatever they want. Or the one that makes people really uncomfortable is change sides of the bed with your spouse. If you normally sleep on the left side of the bed, then you sleep on the right side of the bed. These sound silly, but these are little ways you can get more comfortable with change. So that way, when bigger changes come, you actually already feel a little more comfortable with it. It's like you wouldn't just go and run a marathon having never run before. Instead, start jogging each day, start getting more comfortable with change. So that way, when the big changes come, you have some of those muscles in place to actually go lead that change.
See. So what kind of leadership skills should a person with limited authority exercise to have this kind of influence?
I love that question. So look, I think the way we talk about leadership is broken. The way we teach leadership at business schools around the world, we tend to tell the stories of leaders that are once in a generation. So we tell the story of Steve Jobs pulling the very first iPhone out of his pocket, or Nelson Mandela fighting apartheid and uniting a nation. Now, to be clear, there's a role for this type of leadership, this once-in-a-generation type of leadership. But I think when we put leaders like these up on a pedestal, it causes a lot of us to look at that and say, well, that's just not who I am. I'm not that brave. I'm not that charismatic. I'm not an extrovert. Maybe that means I just can't be a leader. But I think we have it backwards. I think instead of focusing on leader as a title, we need to start thinking about leadership as an act, something that each and every one of us can do. One of my favorite stories from the book comes from American sports, American University Athletics, NCAA. And it's a story of Sedona Prince. So she's 21 years old, and she's a member of the University of Oregon women's basketball team. So due to COVID, the national championships, so the big final tournament, think like the World Cup, but for basketball, were taking place completely in one city. So Indianapolis in America for the men and San Antonio for the women. Now, Sedona Prince noticed something that wasn't fair. She noticed that whereas the weight room, the exercise room for the men's team was huge and expansive, the weight room for the women's team was tiny. It was just like a couple dumbbells and a yoga mat. Like that was it. And she thought, well, this doesn't seem fair. Now, if you think about it, so many people saw exactly what Sedona Prince saw, but they didn't take any action. They thought, well, maybe a coach will take care of it or an administrator will take care of it. Sedona Prince was not famous. She wasn't even a star on her own team, and she certainly wasn't a coach. She was 20. But she decided in that moment to take action. She decided, I don't have a platform. She didn't have 400,000 viewers like you did, but she did have a phone, and she did have a voice. In that moment, she said, okay, I'm going to take out my phone. And she filmed a 38-second TikTok video. She reposted it to Twitter and then went to sleep. In the video, she showed the discrepancy, the difference between the men's room and the women's room, and talked about how this isn't fair. She woke up the next morning. She received over 100,000 retweets on Twitter, invites to join national news shows to talk about it. But most importantly, she had started a national conversation. And what I like about her example is that she didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask if it was okay. She just said, look, I'm not famous, but this doesn't feel right to me. And I'm going to go take action. I'm going to step up and do something about it. And that leads to a concept, one of my favorite concepts in the book, that I call micro-leadership. So micro-leadership breaks leadership down into its smallest and most meaningful unit, which is simply a leadership moment. And if you think about it, these leadership moments appear before us dozens of times per day, small little moments where you can step up and make a difference for others. What does this look like? Well, maybe you're in a meeting and you realize one of your colleagues hasn't spoken up and shared their opinion, and you say, hey, no pressure, but we haven't heard your thoughts on this. Would you feel comfortable sharing? Or maybe it's having the courage to be the one person that says no when everyone else is saying yes. Or maybe it's being the one person to stay late and help a new colleague clean up after their first event. These are all tiny little leadership moments. But when you look back after practicing lots and lots of micro leadership, you realize that you've become a leader before your own eyes. Now, if we go back to the Sedona Prince story, we can see that she embodies the 3 steps of micro leadership. The first, give yourself permission. Stop waiting for permission from someone else. Instead, give it to yourself. Sedona could have asked someone else to say, hey, why don't we do a video? Or can you do a video? Or can we talk about this? It doesn't seem fair. No, she gave herself permission. She said, I'm going to do something about this. The second is go beyond yourself. Find ways to serve others. Find ways to make life better for others. In the case of Sedona Prince, she was thinking not about herself, but about how could she make things better for her fellow women athletes. And then the third part is take action again and again. Each moment in of itself is small, but collectively they really add up. So that's micro leadership. The 3 steps being give yourself permission, go beyond yourself, and take action again and again.
I see. So let's talk more about the purpose of the being a change maker. It's not on the list, but I've got a question. Do we usually have to change or influence others, not ourselves?
Oh, well, I think change often starts with ourselves. And so I think there's a deep inward journey for ourselves. Simon Sinek, popular author and speaker, he talks about starting with why. And I think as change makers, we really do need to have our own personal why, something that drives us, because leading change is really hard and can feel really lonely. So I would say two things. You've got to start by changing yourself. And that's the best part about sort of being human, is that we can always learn, we can always grow. So you've got to change yourself. But I think once you do that, then we also need to think that change making is a team sport, that you won't be able to affect change by yourself. You've got to find ways to bring others into the change with you. So I'd say start with yourself and then invite others in, but both are crucial. You can't do it without others, and you also can't do it without first changing yourself.
I see. Sustainable ways to change. So what mindset do I need to become the leader I dream of? If you had to pick just one thing that was most important, what would it be?
What a good question. Probably courage. I talked about this earlier with Amanda Gorham. I think courage. There's a quote that I love that comes from the American singer-songwriter Joan Baez. And she says, action is the antidote to despair. Action is the antidote to despair. And so I tell my students that if you look around at the world and you feel really frustrated, you feel angry, that's okay. But sometimes the key is not just sitting in that despair, sitting in that anger, but doing something with it. And as Baez says, action is the antidote to despair. And I think that so many good things happen on the other side of taking a risk. Dan Pink, another American author, he wrote a book on regret. And what he found is that more people regretted things they didn't do rather than things they did do. I think so often we kind of know what we want, but we feel scared to take action. But it takes courage to unlock our ability to take action. So I think courage is crucially important. And a way perhaps you can think about that, if you want to be courageous, but it's hard for all of us. I think many of us aren't naturally courageous. But an approach is called protecting the downside of risk. So sort of before you take a risk, think about what's the worst possible thing that could happen. And then think about, how could I mitigate against this? How could I take action now that makes that worst outcome less bad or less probable? So that way I can take my risk with more confidence.
It's also related to the failure exercise you told, right? Okay, absolutely. Then what should I do when I encounter obstacles and feel frustrated in my life as a change maker?
Well, first, remember that change is hard. If change were easy, I wouldn't have needed to write a book. I wouldn't teach classes. It would just be automatic. And so I think we should first remember that there's something called the status quo bias. This is research done by Samuelson and Zeckhauser. They're behavioral economists. And they prove that the status quo bias is real, that we tend to overvalue things we already have. And so that means that when you're leading change, we should start seeing resistance to change as rational. Whether that's change for ourselves, where we say, I want to go run every day, and you can't find yourself running each day. No, be gentle to yourself and realize change is hard. Or maybe it's in a company, you're trying to lead a new initiative, and the first person you talk to says, that's a bad idea. Remember that status quo bias is real and resistance is rational. So I think the key to overcome that is two things. The first is resilience. So again, going back to that failure idea we talked about, it's knowing you'll get knocked down, but getting up again and again. On the flip side of sort of failure is also taking care of ourselves. So making sure that, we take sort of a long-term perspective into things. If we remember that change won't happen overnight and that change is hard, it can help to just zoom out a little bit. Matthew Kelly, he's the author of the book, The Long View. He says, we tend to overestimate what we can do in a day, underestimate what we can do in a month, overestimate what we can do in a year, and underestimate what we can do in 10 years. So put another way, we have this urgency of change. We want things to change right now, but actually sustained change, sustained effort will lead to really good changes. If you think about change on a 10-year span, from Monday to Tuesday, you might not notice that much change. But from 2023 to 2033, that's a long time. And there's a lot of opportunity for change in there. So zooming out, taking a long-term perspective can be really powerful.
It reminds me of a Korean proverb, the old proverb, which is that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. I think that is the journey of a change maker. If someone who has nothing now wants to become a global talent and bring good change, as you did, into the world, what should they do first?
I love that proverb. And I think that's a good connection to change making. So thanks for sharing that. I think for me, it's first pay attention to things that really bother you. And that may seem like a funny place to start because I think I'm a pretty optimistic person. But I think we can often find real wisdom in the things that bother us, that annoy us, and maybe things that bother you more than someone else. It could be a small thing, it could be a big thing, but start making a list, a given day, a given week. What are things that bother you? And then ask yourself why. Ask yourself why a lot. And this helps you figure out some of your values. Once you know your values, that's sort of how you want to show up in the world. That helps start to unlock who you want to be and the change you want to lead. For instance, for me, one of my core values is humility. Humility is, unfortunately, all too rare in the US, but for me, that's a core belief of who I am and the way I want to show up in the world. And so once I realize that part of what bothers me is when people are not humble, then I say, well, part of my own change is to be true to that value. These values can also then help you figure out your why, because based off of that, it can inform what you want to do and why you want to do it. Now, I hope that people watching this will say, yeah, I want to be a change maker. But also remember that your most limited resource is your time and your energy. And so I think it's so important that you focus them in a smart way. There's thousands of changes that our world needs, thousands of changes our companies need, thousands of things you could do with your career. But it's worth spending a bit of time to get clear on your values, get clear on your why, which then allows you to go forward with a bit more confidence and say, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
So I'm amazed that your core, your mindset stands up upon the humility. Wow. So what way do you think so?
My personal why is based on the belief that the world needs more change makers. But I have the humility to say, I don't know exactly what the world needs. I don't know exactly what those changes are. And I think you've got to show up in a way which is that with humility, there's so much complexity in the world. There's so much luck in the world. And if we show up with that humility, not only does it make other people want to more likely work with us, it also more accurately reflects the world around us. That I talked with a best-selling author in the United States, and I was going to him for advice, saying, how could I get more people to know about my book? And his advice for me was basically to do all these things that were not humble. And he goes, Alex, you're being too humble. And I said, okay, maybe I am, but I'm not willing to trade that success for my values. I would rather be humble and less successful than super successful and not humble. And that's a moment where you have to come to terms with your own values, because ultimately you're living your own life, not someone else's. There's an analogy I love, which talks about sort of the traditional ladder of success. You have that ladder, you climb up the wall, and that's how you succeed. But the greatest pain in life is climbing up the wall, reaching the top, and realizing that you've climbed the wrong wall. So in other words, you need to be sure that you're spending your time and your energy and your values in the right way. And I think that's where it all starts.
Thank you. This will be my last question. Is there anything you'd like to say to readers in Korea and subscribers watching this interview?
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I'm grateful you took the time to watch this interview and the support you've already showed behind the book, hearing from some of you with emails just about how the book has touched you. That really means a lot to me. So I guess only two things. The first is feel free to reach out to me. My website is alexbudak.com. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so welcome you to reach out to me there. Let me know that you saw this interview, maybe share what most resonated with you, your favorite part of it. I would love to hear from you. And then really the second thing is that by watching this interview, perhaps by reading the book, you are a change maker. And so now I think one of the best things you can do as a change maker is help those around you become change makers. So, share this video interview with a friend, share the book with a friend, and help them become change makers too.
Okay, thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you about the change maker. And I really hope to see you in Korea someday in your class.
It would be such a pleasure to return back to Korea. And thank you so much. It was a joy and a privilege to get to spend time with you. Thanks for your questions.
Yeah.
And let me also say thank you to you for being a change maker. You've made changes in your own life. And through this channel, you're making big changes and impact on your country and the world. So thank you for being a change maker.
Thank you. Thank you so much.